I'll be honest, I almost didn't take the job. My wife had just had our second kid, a boy, and leaving for 6 weeks in October felt like the worst possible timing. But the money was the money and we needed it, so I packed my gear and drove to Dutch Harbor and signed on with a crab boat crew I'd never worked with before. The captain was a guy named Marco. Stocky, not much for conversation, ran a tight boat. Fine by me. I wasn't there to make friends. There were 5 of us total, including Marco. 4 of us had been together before in various combinations. The 5th was a last-minute ad. A guy named Dale came on board the morning we shipped out with 1 bag and a firm handshake, and that was about all anyone got out of him the first couple days. I didn't think much of it. Quiet guys on boats are normal. What's not normal is a quiet guy who doesn't know things. It's hard to explain to someone who hasn't worked the water. There's just a baseline of knowledge that anyone who spent real time out there has without even thinking about it. Reflexes almost. The way you move when the deck shifts, where you put your eyes in bad weather, the small habits. Dale didn't have them. He did the work fine, I want to be clear about that. But underneath it, he moved like someone who'd studied the job rather than lived it. I mentioned it to the guy I was bunking with, a deckhand named Paulie, and he said he'd noticed the same thing. We left it at that. Around day 4, I'm eating and Dale sits across from me and just starts asking questions, real casual. How far out were we going exactly? Whether we'd be passing close to any other vessels? What the radio traffic was usually like this time of year? I answered him straight because I didn't have a reason not to yet, but afterward I sat with the conversation and it felt wrong. Not any one question, the shape of them together. I went to Marco that night. He didn't react much, just nodded and said to keep it between us and stay aware. Marco was not the type to get excited. What cracked it open was Paulie's kid finding the bag. The kid was 18, first full season, and he stumbled on it completely by accident looking for something in the wrong bunk. Inside the bag was a hunting knife, a prepaid phone, and a piece of paper with our boat's name on it, our departure date, and a rough sketch of our route. And you know what? Marco got us all together below deck without Dale knowing, and we looked at that paper, and nobody said anything for a while. We called it in on a secondary channel and were told to hold and stay calm and that help was coming. That took 6 hours. I have never in my life wanted to be somewhere else as badly as I wanted to be somewhere else those 6 hours. Dale ate dinner. He watched something on the little TV in the cabin. At one point, he laughed at it. I was sitting 4 feet from him thinking about that knife and laughing along with him because what else do you do? When the Coast Guard came alongside, Dale looked at the cutter and then looked at me. And whatever had been behind his face the whole trip just went flat. Like he'd been holding something, and he set it down. He went with them without a word. I never got the full story officially. What I heard through back channels was that the name he gave wasn't his, and that there were people looking for him that had nothing to do with fishing. What he actually intended to do once we were far enough out, I don't know. I think about those 6 hours a lot. I think about how calm he seemed the whole time. That's the part that stays with me. Not the knife, not the paper with our route on it. Just how completely normal he seemed the whole time. My wife asked me if I'd go back out next season. I told her I hadn't decided yet. That was 8 months ago, and I still haven't. I've been a state trooper in rural Alaska for going on 9 years. I'm not going to use my real name or the name of the village because it's a small community and people there know me, and I'd rather keep this separate from my professional life. What I'm about to describe, I've only told 2 people before, my wife and my sergeant, and my sergeant's response was to look at me for a long moment and then say, "Let's get the paperwork done and never bring it up again." So, welfare check, February. Village of maybe 200 people, accessible only by small plane or snow machine. The call came in through the village public safety officer, a young guy who was relatively new to the role. He'd gone to check on an elderly man who lived alone on the edge of the village after neighbors said they hadn't seen him in several days. The VPSO found the house apparently empty and got uncomfortable enough with the situation that he called it up to us. I flew in the following morning. The house was a small structure, maybe 400 square feet, the kind of place people have been living in that part of Alaska for decades. Wood stove, oil drum out back, snow packed up around the foundation for insulation. The VPSO met me and walked me over. The front door wasn't locked. In a lot of these villages, people don't lock doors, especially older folks. We went inside. The wood stove was warm, not hot, not freshly loaded, but warm in a way that meant it had been burning not that long ago, maybe a few hours. There was a half-eaten plate of food on the table, crackers and something canned, I don't remember what exactly. The food wasn't spoiled, it hadn't been there for days. The coffee pot on the stove had a small amount in it that was still warm. The man's coat was on the hook by the door. His boots were on the mat below it. In February, in a village where it was -20 outside. I walked through the whole house. It took about 45 seconds, it was that small. Bedroom, bathroom, main room, nothing disturbed, nothing knocked over, no sign of a struggle or a medical episode or anything that told a story. Just a half-eaten plate of food, and a warm stove, and boots by the door. I went back outside and the VPSO and I walked the perimeter. Snow around the house was undisturbed except for our own tracks coming in and his tracks from the day before. No tracks leaving. No indication that anyone had walked away from that house in the recent snow. I'm going to just say that plainly again because I want it to be clear. The snow around the house showed no tracks leaving. His boots were inside. The stove was still warm. The food on the table was recent. We searched. We got the village involved, people who knew the area and knew him, and we searched for the better part of 2 days. We found nothing. No indication of where he had gone or how. I've worked cases that didn't get resolved. That's part of the job out here, and you make your peace with it because you have to. But the ones that don't resolve usually have some thread you can follow even if it runs out. This one was a warm stove and a coat on a hook and nothing else. He was never found. I filed my report and I flew back out, and I went home and I sat in my kitchen for a while before my wife came in and asked if I was okay. I told her about the boots. I don't know why that was the thing that got to me most, but it was. Everything else I could construct some explanation for, however thin. But the boots stayed with me. You don't leave your boots in February in rural Alaska. You just don't. Whatever happened in that house, whoever or whatever came for that man, he didn't see it coming. He didn't have time to put his boots on. That's the part I can't put in the box. Everything else I've managed to set down, but the boots I still think about. And I think I probably always will. Three seasons at the cannery, and I thought I'd seen everything weird that place had to offer. You have to understand what late-season night shift is like out there to get why this hit different. Peak season, the floor is loud and packed, and you don't have room in your head for anything except keeping up with the line. Late season, it thins out. Some nights, it's 4 or 5 of us rattling around a building that was built for 30. The overhead lights are brutal, bright directly under them and then just black everywhere else, and the whole place smells like fish and cold metal and something underneath that I still can't name after 3 years of smelling it. This particular night, it was me, a guy named Hector who ran the offloading equipment, a woman named Bet who I'd worked alongside all season, and some young guy at the far end of the line who kept to himself. 2 in the morning. The kind of 2 in the morning where time stops moving right. I was at my station and I glanced up at the window row along the exterior wall. High windows, maybe 8 feet off the ground, narrow, the kind that crank open for ventilation in summer. You can see out through them if the angle's right. There was a head on the other side of the glass. Just the top of one, just above the sill. Like whoever it was standing directly against the outside of the building and was just barely tall enough or standing on something to be visible. I stood there and stared at it and told myself I was misreading shadows. And then it moved, slow, sideways, tracking along the wall, following the window line from one pane to the next. I got Hector. Didn't make a thing of it, just told him to come look. By the time we got back, the head had moved further down the row, still doing that same slow drift. Hector went outside. I watched from my station. I watched him come around the corner with his flashlight and sweep the gravel along the wall. He came back in and said there was no one out there. But here's the thing. I watched him the entire time. I watched the figure moving along the windows, and I watched Hector's flashlight moving below the windows, and those two things were never in the same place, like they were on different tracks. I can't explain that. I've tried. The figure came back twice more before the shift ended. I didn't tell anyone. I just watched it make its way along the windows and then disappear and then come back again later, and I stood there at my station and kept working because what else was I going to do? 6 in the morning, I walked the outside of the building before I left. The gravel along that wall was raked flat and still damp from rain earlier in the night. No footprints. I asked around after that, carefully, whether anyone on other shits had seen anything at those windows. 2 people said yes immediately and then looked like they regretted saying it and found somewhere else to be. I didn't push it. There are things about that building that the people who work there have just agreed not to examine too closely. I don't know if that's the right call, but I've got 2 more months left on my contract and I need the money, so I guess for now, it's my call too. Me and my buddy Carr have been hunting together since we were in our 20s. We're both in our mid-40s now, so that's a long time of knowing how somebody moves through the woods, knowing their habits, knowing when they're tired, we're spooked, or just having an off day. I say that because when I tell you we both felt it from the first morning, I need you to understand that neither of us is the type to feel things without reason. We'd packed into a drainage in the Alaska Range, about 11 miles from the nearest road. Moose country, good country. We'd hunted a different drainage in the same area 3 years prior and done well. This was new ground for us, but the same general feel. We got in on a Thursday, set up camp, glassed the hillsides until dark, saw some sign, went to sleep feeling good about it. Friday morning is when it started. We were maybe a mile from camp, moving along a bench above a creek, when Carr stopped and grabbed my arm. I stopped. We stood there. He was looking back the way we came, and I looked too, and there was nothing there. Just the hillside and the alders and the gray morning sky. I asked him what. He said he didn't know. He just felt like something was behind us. We stood there for another minute and then kept moving, because that's what you do. You don't pack 11 miles into the Alaska Range and go home because your buddy got a feeling. But the feeling didn't go away. It's hard to describe to someone who hasn't spent real time in the backcountry, but there's a texture to being alone in wild country, and there's a different texture to being watched in wild country. And by mid-morning on that first full day, we were both feeling the second one. Neither of us said it out loud. We just started moving differently, checking back more, pausing in the alders before stepping into the open. We didn't see anything, no tracks we could attribute to anything specific, no sounds that were wrong exactly. Just that feeling, steady and low, like a tone you can't quite hear but can feel in your chest. That night in the tent, Carr brought it up. He said he kept seeing movement in his peripheral vision all day, but every time he turned, there was nothing there. I told him I'd had the same thing. We talked about bear, we talked about wolves, we talked about whether we were just psyching ourselves out being on new ground. We went to sleep without a conclusion. Saturday was worse. We'd split up mid-morning, agreed to meet back at a landmark boulder at 2 in the afternoon. Standard stuff, we'd done it 100 times. I was working along a creek bottom when I heard Carr's shot. One shot, about a mile to the north. I waited for a follow-up, and there wasn't one, which usually means a clean kill, so I wasn't worried. I started moving in his direction. I found him 40 minutes later standing in a clearing, and he was not okay. He'd shot a moose, yes, but the moose was at the edge of the clearing, and Carr was in the middle of the clearing, and he was facing back the way I'd come from, not the direction of the animal. When I called out to him, he turned around and his face was wrong, just off in a way that I didn't have words for. He told me that after he shot, he'd walked up to the animal and was starting to work on it when he heard something in the trees on the uphill side of the clearing. He said it wasn't an animal sound. He couldn't describe it more than that, just that it wasn't an animal and it wasn't the wind and it wasn't anything he could name. He said he stood up and whatever was in the trees went quiet. And then something stepped out of the tree line on the other side of the clearing, about 60 yards from him, and stood there. He said it was tall. He said it was dark. He said it stood there for what felt like a long time, and then it stepped back into the trees and was gone. I asked him what it was. He didn't know. I asked him what he thought it was. He didn't answer that one. We got the moose broken down and packed out in 2 trips. We moved fast and didn't talk much. The feeling was still there, that low, steady pressure of being watched all the way back to camp and through the night and the next morning when we packed out. 11 miles out to the road. I checked behind us probably every 3 or 4 minutes the entire way. We didn't see anything else. Whatever it was, it didn't follow us out, or if it did, it stayed out of sight. We haven't talked about it much since. Carr is not a man who talks about things he can't explain. He just puts them in a box and moves on. And I've mostly done the same. But we haven't gone back to that drainage. We've talked about it a couple of times, whether we should, and we always end up deciding on somewhere else. We don't have to say out loud why. We don't need to. Okay, so I want to preface this by saying I am not someone who spooks easy. I've been flying bush planes in Alaska for 14 years. I have put aircraft down in places that weren't meant to be runways and walked away and gone back to work. I say that not to brag, but because I need you to understand that what I'm about to describe is not me being dramatic. I have thought about this probably every week for the last 2 years, and I still don't have an answer for it. Late September, supply run to a hunting camp in the Alaska range. Weather looked passable when I lifted off. If you fly Alaska, you already know where this is going. By the time I was 40 minutes out, the ceiling had dropped fast and the wind was doing things I didn't want any part of. So I found the best available ground and put the Cessna down in a narrow alpine valley. Hard landing, bent strut, not going anywhere until someone came to get me. I got on the radio and gave my position, was told conditions were too poor for retrieval until morning at the earliest, possibly the following day. Fine. I've overnighted in worse situations. I had my gear, I set up against the fuselage, I was managing. Then I looked out across the valley and there was a cabin. Quarter mile maybe. Dark logs low to the ground, the kind of thing that disappears into the terrain until the light catches it right. I sat there and stared at it for a while because it was not on my topo map and I know that range and I had no memory of a structure in that valley. But people build remote cabins all over the state, a lot of them informal. A lot of them not on any chart. So, okay, cabin exists, no big deal. Then I saw the smoke coming out of the chimney. Thin line of it, steady. Someone was in there with a fire going. Practical assessment, I had adequate survival gear. I did not need to approach an unknown structure with an unknown occupant in fading light. That was the correct assessment. I went anyway because it was 18 degrees and dropping and a wood stove is a wood stove. The walk took longer than I expected. The valley floor was boggy in spots. By the time I got there, it was nearly dark. I knocked. Nothing. Knocked again, called out, explained I was a pilot, emergency landing, not a threat. Nothing. The door wasn't locked, it wasn't even latched. It swung open when I pushed it. Inside warm, stove going, loaded with wood, burning like it had been tended recently. Lantern on the table, lit. Tin cup on the table with liquid in it that was still warm when I put my hand around it. No one there. I checked the back room, empty. I went back outside and walked around the cabin with my flashlight. The ground was too frozen and hard for clear tracks. No snow machine, no gear outside, no indication of how anyone arrived or left. I went back inside because I was cold and I'm practical. I spent the night in the chair by the stove. I didn't use the bunk. I don't know exactly why, it just didn't feel right to. I woke up twice thinking I heard something outside, and both times I sat still and listened until I was sure there was nothing. And then I sat there a while longer just to be certain. Morning came, weather lifted. I got out a message and was picked up by mid-morning. I reported the coordinates, was told there was no permitted structure at that location. Filed a report with the land management agency like they told me to. Never heard back. I've flown over that valley twice since, On the second pass, the visibility was good and I came in low specifically to look. There's nothing there. No cabin, no clearing, no footprint in the landscape where structure might have stood. I'm not a person who believes in things I can't explain. That's genuinely how I'm wired, so this bothers me in a specific way that I can't shake. Like a math problem where I check the work 3 times and the answer still comes out wrong. I know what I touched. I know the cup was warm. I know the stove was loaded and burning. I don't know what to do with any of that, so mostly I just don't. This was 2 winters ago, and I'm still not entirely sure what to make of it, so I'll just tell it the way it happened and let you draw your own conclusions. I was snowmobiling between 2 villages on the Yukon, a run I'd done maybe a dozen times before. It's about 60 miles of river and open country, nothing technical, but you respect it because if something goes wrong out there in January, you are in a genuinely bad situation. I'd done the run alone before, most people out there have. You just make sure your machine is good and you tell someone when to expect you. My machine was not good, as it turned out. About 35 miles in, middle of nowhere, the engine just quit. Not a sputter, not a warning, just off. I won't get into the mechanical details because I'm not a mechanic, and I still don't fully understand what happened, but the short version is it wasn't something I could fix on the side of a frozen river in the dark. My headlamp was good, my gear was good, I had my emergency kit, but it was 30 below when the wind had picked up, and standing next to a dead machine waiting for someone to miss me was not a survivable plan. I knew there was a fish camp somewhere off the river in that stretch. I'd never stopped there, but I'd seen the trail marker a couple of times going past. I found the trail and followed it about a half-mile back into the trees where there was a small cabin with a light on. I knocked. A man opened the door. He was older, maybe late 60s, native, not someone I recognized, which wasn't unusual since I'd only been in the area about a year. He looked at me for a second and then stepped back and waved me inside without me having to explain anything, like he'd been expecting someone to turn up. Inside was warm and clean, small, just the one room, wood stove going strong, a cot along one wall, a table with 2 chairs. He put a kettle on without asking. I told him about the machine and he nodded and said we'd deal with it in the morning, and that was that. He gave me food, caribou stew, and we sat at the table and he asked where I was headed and I told him and he nodded again. He wasn't unfriendly, that's important to say, but there was something about the way he talked that was slightly off from normal conversation. Like there was a small delay between what I said and when he responded, just a beat longer than natural. And he never asked my name. I noticed that maybe an hour in. I'd told him where it was going, told him about my machine, we'd been sitting together for a while, and he'd never asked my name. I asked his. He smiled and said something I didn't catch clearly, a word that didn't sound like a name I recognized, and then he pointed to the cot and said I should sleep and we'd sort out the machine in the morning. I slept because I was exhausted and cold, and the alternative was not sleeping in a warm cabin, which wasn't a real alternative. I woke up once in the night. The wood stove was still going. The man was sitting in the chair at the table in the dark, just sitting there. I watched him for a moment and then closed my eyes, and when I opened them again, it was morning, and he was at the stove making something. We went out to the machine together. He looked at it for a while and then did something with 2 fingers at a connection near the engine. Something simple, something I should have found myself, and it started. I don't know if I missed it the night before or what. I thanked him, and he waved it off and watched me get situated on the machine. Before I pulled away, I asked him his name again because I wanted to be able to tell people who had helped me. He said the same word the night before. I still couldn't make it out clearly. I nodded like I had and left. When I got to the village, I told a woman I knew there about the cabin and the man and described him as best I could. She listened, and when she finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said there hadn't been anyone at that fish camp in years. She said the man who used to use it had passed away a while back. I didn't know what to say to that, so I just said okay and changed the subject. I don't know what I encountered out there. The logical part of my brain says she was wrong or I had the wrong camp, but I've gone back and forth on it for 2 years now, and I can't fully make myself believe that. The stew was good though. That part was real. I know that sounds like a strange thing to hold on to, but it's the thing I keep coming back to. Whatever it was, the stew was real and it was good, and it kept me warm, and I made it to the village in one piece. I try to focus on that.